All right. So thank you all so much for joining this webinar. I'm actually quite blown away by the amount of people that are interested in this. It's really incredible that people are signing up and taking an hour out of their evening to learn the skills of positive behavior supports. It is something very dear to my heart, and something I'm really happy to be sharing with anyone who's interested. Our audience today comprises of parents, teachers, students, pretty much other professionals, pretty much anybody that you can think of that might possibly be interested in it has registered, which is really, really awesome to see. So just a bit about myself. I think I said this previously as I was on the screen, but my name is Anush. I am the founder and owner of an organization called Cayman ABA. ABA stands for Applied Behavior Analysis. It is a practice that I've been in for 12 years now, and I'm a board certified behavior analyst, which means that I provide treatment plans, assessments, behavioral assessments, as well as skill assessments to children with and without developmental delays. So we offer two kind of services. On the one hand, we work on comprehensive skill acquisition plans for children with developmental delays or autism. And on the other hand, we also offer focused behavioral support plans for typically developing children. So the field of applied behavior analysis is quite vast. It covers everything from what it is a subset of psychology that works on just behavior, and what we can observe instead of the cognitive behavior psychology, which is more thought-based and talk therapy. Behavioral applied behavior analysis is a do therapy. It is based on doing and observation of things. So my experience is in both clinical practice of ABA, but also in positive behavior supports, largely in a school setting. So the first time I was exposed to positive behavior supports was back in 2008, when I was working in a public school in the United States, and I was absolutely blown away when I was the very first training I did in positive behavior supports. I thought, oh my goodness, this could change the world. PBS, positive behavior supports, is like I said, very dear to me, and very it's an integral way of life and a skill set that once you learn and you start practicing, starts to really become amazing and be a changer. So I hope that that's your experience. For total transparency, I must say I am not myself a parent. However, in my experience, in my practice, I work with parents. But I always like to say that because there is an element of being a parent that I have not yet experienced, and I have witnessed that being a very challenging thing. So I am empathetic to the challenges that parents face, and I've observed those challenges. I have not experienced them, but I do know what you're up against. So over the course of the next 4 weeks, we're going to be learning, we're going to be completing a series that I've broken down into 4 trainings called the Skills of Positive Behavior Supports for Parents. Although it's specific to parents, really teachers can benefit from this. You just replace the word parent with teacher and change some of the terms, and it applies. So throughout these 4 weeks, we're going to learn how to define behavior in behavioral terms without guessing. We're going to learn why behavior is happening. So if that question's ever occurred to you, why does my child do this? We will try to answer that question. We're going to learn to set clear expectations and boundaries with children. We will learn how to identify motivators and avoid using coercion or punishment. We're going to learn to identify and teach a more appropriate behavior that we want children to engage in instead of what we like to call undesirable behavior. And we will learn to focus on the positives and pivot/ignore junk behavior. So these are all words. If you're wondering what coercion and pivot means, we'll learn throughout this course. Hopefully these skills will help to build your child's self-esteem and confidence. And finally, we're going to be working on reducing emotional responding. So while we have a variety of people in the audience that come from different backgrounds, this is actually, it can apply to, like I said, being a parent, being a teacher, being a person, truly. So the way that this will work is our first session tonight will be an introduction to positive behavior supports and understanding behavior. Our second session next Thursday will be on establishing the function. Third, we will learn how to set expectations and follow through with those expectations. And our fourth and final session will be talking about using reinforcement and teaching replacement behaviors. So you'll see that there are this is typically an 8-part course, but I've broken it down for the webinar purposes because the last 4 series are usually in person. However, I have consolidated it in, and I know we will get through all of the material in the first 4. All right, so let's introduce PBS, Positive Behavior Supports. Sometimes we hear about PBS as a PBIS, Positive Behavior Interventions and Supports. That is, it's the same thing. Positive Behavior Supports it's called intervention supports when it's used in school settings. It is used across a number of countries, and in fact, in the Cayman Islands, we had the Department of Education Services actually flew down one of the gurus, one of the founding fathers of positive behavior supports, to train teachers. So that was a couple of years ago, but truly PBS is something that is really becoming widespread in school systems. And also, if you've heard of positive parenting or anything along those lines, that's where there's a lot of foundations and interlinks from PBS. So in positive behavior supports, we're going to begin by conceptualizing this as a foundational approach. It is a foundational approach because you're not just going to suddenly wake up tomorrow and start doing everything differently than you did the day before. You're going to build on the foundation that you have already existing, and put another pillar of the foundation in place. In positive behavior supports, we're asking parents to make a commitment to changing your own defaults, your own behavioral norms, and using new skills to actively teach new behavior in your children. So we do ask that you commit to this. What I mean by this is that behavior change does not just happen to a person. It happens with a commitment to changing the environment, which we'll get into in a bit more depth as we go. But truly, I ask that you come into this knowing that whatever you learn from this scenario, it's not going to work unless you commit to trying it. And with that, also remember that being a parent and juggling things, particularly in this difficult time where, you're expected to now be a homeschooled teacher and working from home and all of those balls that you've got in the air that you're trying to juggle, usually I ask that parents practice this 70% of the time on a great day, on a normal day. During these times, give yourself some slack. Try it 50% of the time. You should start seeing some results. So, some core components of positive behavior supports. The idea behind positive behavior supports is that parents will be modeling desirable behaviors. You'll hear a lot throughout this presentation. I never refer to behavior as good or bad. I don't even refer to it as maladaptive, because behavior that is occurring is adaptive in some way. It's occurring because someone's adapted to their environment and learned a new behavior. So I will talk about desirable and undesirable behaviors as kind of social norms that we expect and hope that our children engage in. So in PBS, a core component is that parents will model desirable behaviors. In positive behavior supports, parents pay more attention to desirable behaviors and less attention to undesirable behaviors. We're going to be focusing on building relationships, building a foundational relationship with your children that is different maybe in some ways than what you currently have. Obviously, you all have a relationship with your child. We're going to try to add in components to that relationship that might be different, focused on connecting good things that they do or desirable behaviors with good things that happen to them. Okay, so there's the four main components of positive behavior supports, and that's really all there is to it. So we're going to learn how to connect doing the appropriate or the expected behavior with rewards that might already be in place in your household. Maybe you already give allowances, or maybe you already give them access to the iPad or TV or what have you. So we're going to keep those things in place, but we're going to try to connect those with good things that happen instead of just giving them away for free. So we're going to start this by trying to identify our behavioral defaults as caregivers. So, and also if you're not a parent or caregiver and you're in this call, you can be thinking about this on a personal level. What are your behavioral defaults on a personal level, or interpersonal level, I should say. So I want you to think about how we naturally respond to difficulty in our environment or people problems. Think about how you respond in the workplace. Think about how you respond when your children are driving you absolutely up the walls. What is your natural way of responding? What do you do? Take a moment and just sort of inventory your natural responses. Do you shout? Do you stomp your feet? I mean, there could be a number of things. Do you talk to them about it and explain why it's wrong? What does our culture promote? Here across the world, there are different ways of responding to things and different disciplinary practices. So we want to think about what is the predominant response strategy in our culture for managing problem behaviors. Is it disciplinarian? Is it largely punitive? So think about that. I won't make any kind of statements on that, as it really varies. And it varies from the culture that you came from, the culture that you grew up in, as well as what was your household, your family culture. So that's very unique to individuals, and sometimes supported by society at large. And lastly, what did we learn as kids? When you were a child, how did your parents respond to adversity? Or, if you got in a fight with your siblings, what was the response from your parents for that? So think about all of those things as we go through the next couple of slides. And one of the things I want to say before we switch into the next couple of slides is that oftentimes, as we get into it, parents think, oh my goodness, I'm so... these are all things that I do. These strategies that I'm not supposed to be doing. I actually do them. Please cut yourself some slack and understand that is normal. We all do these things, because the answer to this question of do we instinctively use positive behavior supports is no, we do not. So there's this word that we use in positive behavior supports called coercion. Sometimes when I think about that word outside of the framework of positive behavior supports, coercion means being forced. Usually that's how it's used. In this context, we define it as a person-delivered punishment. Being coercive is when you are trying to stop a behavior from happening. So it's punishment. It's delivered by you. Often it's what we learn by default in our culture. It's often a habitual reaction rather than a planned response, and it's used to control or stop undesirable behavior. I will give you a clue. Coercion is most people's behavioral default. And the reason for that, I remember doing a training on positive behavior supports once, and somebody in the room said, well, if this isn't natural, if people don't naturally, respond without coercion, then why is positive behavior supports going to be so effective? Why don't people naturally just use positive behavior supports? And we'll learn about that throughout this training. We'll learn the reason that our behavior happens as well is because there's something good that there's something maintaining our own behavior. So some examples of coercion. As you go through this list, remember, don't hide your head in shame and think of all the times you've done these, because I can tell you if I go through this list on a daily basis, I probably hit at least 4. So I'll go through some of these examples and think about whether or not you've observed these happening to your child, or observed these as a child yourself, or if these are things that you typically engage in. So the first one is questioning. Examples of this are, how many times have I told you not to leave your clothes on the floor? That's a perfect, that's a very common one. Questioning is asking a question that you actually don't expect an answer to. When we use questioning, we actually set the stage for lying behavior. When we ask a question that we're not expecting an answer to, that's an opportunity for children to lie. One of the things that I work with a lot on is behavior plans just focused on lying. When children are lying to try to get out of the consequences that they're expecting. Often one of the best things that we can do to reduce lying is stop questioning. If you know that you sent them to the bathroom to brush their teeth, and then they come out and they still have, all the food in their teeth, and they clearly didn't brush their teeth. So our response shouldn't be, did you brush your teeth? No, we know the answer. We should just restate the instruction. So questioning, how many times have I told you to do this? Arguing. Arguing it can be verbal arguing, or it can be nonverbal arguing. Putting someone down, using disrespectful tone or language, rolling your eyes. The one thing I will say about arguing is, if you're applying positive behavior supports to children, arguing is one thing you can just immediately check off the list. We don't argue with children. We're going to adopt the role of, hey, I'm the adult in the room. This is the expectation, and this is exactly what's going to happen. And we can't engage in arguments with children. Sarcasm and teasing. This is a gray area, because some places and some cultures and some families, sarcasm goes over no problem. But sometimes it's hard for children to interpret sarcasm. Sometimes that kind of teasing, it can be unclear. And one of the goals in positive behavior supports is that we're going to try to clarify. We're going to clarify expectations, and we're going to clarify what is going to happen when you don't meet the expectations. And what is going to happen when you do meet the expectations. So when we're sarcastic or when we're teasing, it becomes difficult for children or other people to really understand what your intentions are and if you mean what you say. Force, that can be physical or verbal as well. With force, I like for people to think about, again, when you're the adult in the room, just by the physical size of you compared to a child, you are automatically exerting some force just by the fact that you stand taller than a child. So we really have to be cautious of avoiding the use of our force or our size or our body or our presence in managing problem behaviors. And I'll tell you why in a little bit. But force can be physical or verbal. Shouting, using kind of intimidation. All of those are examples of force. Physical as well could be spanking or beating, etc. So the next one is threats. So these ones are my favorite, and we in the third session we will talk about threats versus sort of reinforcers, and the difference between the two. So threatening. Hey, if you don't do this, you are going to lose your iPad for the rest of the summer. Those kinds of things. So throwing out the threat in the midst of the conflict to get them to do what you need them to do. That is something to avoid. Using criticism. So criticism is when we connect the behavior to the person. and say things like, oh, you always do this. This is that connects it to the person. It personalizes it. Criticism is really damaging for self-esteem and for relationships. So we want to avoid criticism whenever we can. Using despair or guilt. So those examples of that is, it's one thing to let someone know how you feel, and you should definitely express feelings and teach your children about emotions. However, when we take it to the next level of, when our intention is to try to make someone feel bad for us, or feel bad about something that they did, that's where we get into guilt. And that's a slippery slope, and it's dangerous for relationships. Logic is when we lecture after the fact. This is a great one that we see. Oh, great. I'm being sarcastic. There I go with my, see, I told you I would hit 4. Logic is when we lecture after the fact. So this is the prime example of this is schools, right? This is one of the things that we see in school a lot. We pull the child aside, or we pull the children aside, and, we spend time lecturing why this is not okay. We don't do this behavior, and this is why. And it goes on for a little bit longer than just immediately. So lecturing after the fact is something to avoid. Taking away things that are valuable. This one is interesting in our day and age. There's been some interesting studies into the fact that with electronics these days and personal belongings, children, particularly children, which is harder for those of us that didn't grow up with technology, it's harder for us to relate to, but those electronic devices, phones, iPads, computers, those are essentially an extension of the person. So when you take away privileges to those things, that can be really difficult for a person to manage. Maybe that's their connection to their friend network. Maybe that's their escape from stress. That's their coping skills. So when we take away those things for extended periods of time, it can have real effects on people. And so when we deny access to things that are valuable to somebody, we have to be really, really sure that we have set up a very clear contingency or a very clear consequence system that explains to the person before they engage in the behavior that they're going to lose that thing if they cross this line. But we don't want to be taking things away from them reactionarily. Talking badly about the person in front of the person is another example. This is one, again, we see a lot, in schools. It's just a common practice when we pick up our children from school, and we have that handover with the teacher, how did Johnny do today? And we get a laundry list of the bad things that happen. We never really say, oh my goodness, he played so nice. I mean, usually when something bad happens at school or, in general, that's the thing that gets highlighted and reported. And sometimes it's highlighted and reported with the intention of the individual hearing it. So the child is standing there, and sort of the adults stand there with their hands on their hip, and they kind of look over sideways at the child like, oh, you did this. And it's sort of intended for the child to hear it. That is not good. It makes the person feel bad. And the last point, it actually leads to the person labeling themselves as bad. So when they hear so much focus on the things that they did badly, and they're such a bad kid, even if you're not saying that, or the teacher's not saying that, or no one's explicitly saying that, children start to internalize this. And if they keep messing up, they will label themselves as bad. And you'll hear children say it at 7 years old. I'm just the bad kid. I'm just bad, and I, most of the time when I sit down with those kids that are calling themselves the bad kid, they don't want to be the bad kid. They truly feel that they're the bad kid because that's what they've learned, and that's what they've heard. So as we talked about in those last slides, or in that last slide, we want to avoid coercion. We want to avoid every single one of those if we can. it makes things worse for the person. So coercion, it doesn't actually achieve what we want it to do in the long run. We use these things because we are trying to stop and change the problematic behavior or the undesirable behavior that we don't want to see. But it doesn't work. It works in the short term. It might stop it, but it leads to long-term problems. It doesn't teach what you're supposed to do instead. And in fact, it leads to emotional responding. If your child sees you responding in these ways, these are usually connected with emotions. All of these things, we never say these things or use these tactics emotion-free. They're usually connected to emotions, and so we call this emotional responding. And it will lead to your child mimicking that and engaging in emotional responding as well. They'll try to avoid those things. So they'll do everything. That's where lying comes from. They want to avoid the consequences of admitting that they did something bad, so to speak. Or they might want to get revenge, get even. Or they might want to escape from expectations. So it leads to emotional responding. It models emotional responding, and it leads to the child needing to engage in emotional responding to avoid, get even, or escape. In the end, it actually tears down relationships, and it doesn't help build positive and healthy relationships. Again, if you're looking at this and you're thinking, oh my goodness, I'm doomed, I do all of these things, let me remind you, this is my clinical practice, and I'm supposed to practice this every day, and I still use plenty of these things. So, like I said, you're trying to commit to this most of the time, and you're trying to change your way of thinking. You're trying to catch yourself. Whenever you engage in these things, think, oh my goodness, am I being coercive? And if the answer is yes, hopefully this training gives you tools to change that behavior in yourself. So, as we said in the last slide, coercion, it doesn't teach anything new. It might stop the behavior, but it's not going to teach new responses. In fact, it teaches the behavior that you actually don't want to see, because all of those behaviors, if you look at this list again, how would you feel if your children engage in these behaviors? You don't like it when they push each other, probably, when they're using force. You probably don't like it when they're being, overly teasing with their siblings or their peers. And when they're arguing with you, putting you down, disrespecting, rolling your eyes, you don't like it when they do those things. So we definitely don't want to do those things ourselves, because it teaches those things. Monkey see, monkey do. Children are absolutely take on what they see us doing, and they do it themselves. So really, really ask yourself, how do I behave when I'm frustrated? Because when you're frustrated, that's when these coercive behaviors are going to come out the strongest. Or when you're tired, or when you're hangry. In my case, when I'm really hungry, I get frustrated, and that's where my coercion comes out. Individuals will behave less confidently in environments where there's a lot of coercion. The reason for this is that they don't know what to expect. So if you don't know what to expect, if you don't know what's going to happen, if people are always responding with these, different ways. So, one day I punched my brother and my parent didn't even see. They didn't know. And, when he tattled on me, the response from my parent was, I'm too tired to deal with this. You work it out. But then the next time, let's say totally different day, different experience, and the same exact behavior happens, but the response on that day is, what on earth are you doing? You're done with the iPad for the rest of the week. So that kind of contrast in how you administer consequences leads people to being less confident in themselves as well as in you as a parent. They're going to behave maybe like they're walking on eggshells, or maybe like they don't know what's going to happen, because they don't know what's going to happen. It's not always consistent. So the more consistency you can bring into your reactions, the more confidence you're going to build in your children. Another effect of coercion is that the undesirable behavior is actually what gets the focus and the attention. And we tend to miss all of the other things that your child is doing right. So we don't want to do that. We want to turn our focus on those other things, the things that they're doing right, even if they're simple things that we take for granted. Usually, like I the example I will always give is parents who tell me, they're like, when my child is doing the right thing, that is when I'm silent. That's when I don't want to disturb the beast. I definitely don't want to get, because it'll stop. And okay, if you have a child that might respond to it in that manner, and as soon as you point out what they're doing well, they change it, then don't do it. But you can put in other systems. You can take a tally. And at the end of the day, when, everything's calm and you don't have to worry about them suddenly turning, it against you, you can say, hey, you know what? I counted 7 different times today that you were doing something amazing. So we want to turn our focus onto the desirable behaviors and not the undesirable behaviors. And as we talked about, effects of coercion may produce short-term results with long-term problems. So Dennis the Menace here in this cartoon is saying, well, wouldn't it be easier just to tell me what I can do instead of what he can't do? Most of the time we just say, we use coercion. We say, no, stop it. Don't do that. You can't, and what we want to do is tell the child instead what they are expected to do. So hopefully that gives you a good foundation in positive behavior supports as a kind of framework of what we're going to get through in this course. And we're going to use that framework the whole time as we go through this. So next we're going to try to learn, set a new foundation as well for our understanding of behavior. So what is behavior? Most of the time, if you answered that question to yourself in your head, you probably thought of bad things. I mean, raise your hand to yourself if that was you. When we say the word behavior, we're often thinking of bad behavior. We don't think of behavior as drinking, sitting down, breathing, but those are all behaviors. So we're going to make sure we understand behavior more objectively. First, let's start with some fundamental facts about behavior. Most behavior is learned from the environment and from a very early age. The only behaviors that are really not learned are, crying as an infant when a baby cries, or the rooting reflex, or grasping. There are certain very fundamental behaviors. Breathing, obviously, we don't learn. Those behaviors are ingrained in our, we call it the reptile brain, the very lowest area of our brainstem. Those are not learned behaviors. But the human brain has developed a bunch of different layers on top of the brainstem over time. And we now have this incredible cortex of memory and experiences that all intertwines into a network. So what teaches us behaviors is the environment. And what I mean by the environment, it can be anything from our current situation. So the room you're sitting in is your environment at the moment, but it's also your history, your learning history of your experiences that you've experienced, how people have interacted with you in the past. Probably we can all remember experiences where we learned, not to do something, whether that was we touched the stove and it burned us, so we learned not to touch the stove again, etc. So the environment comprises of people, other environmental things like, temperature and house, what have you. Physiology and genetics also play a role. So there are certain genes and hereditary things that turn off or turn on certain genes and make it more likely that certain behaviors will be expressed. In all, the idea is that the environment shapes a vast majority of our behavior. So when we look at behavior, we can shy away from, we can stop blaming the person for being disrespectful or being inappropriate. And instead, we want to look at the third point here. The third fact is the environment. If we can change the environment, the person's experience will change and their behavior will change. So I want to urge you to stop thinking about what is wrong with your child. And I don't want you to think about what's wrong with you. There's nothing wrong with you either. Instead, I want you to think about what can change in my environment. Because I know that behavior is learned from what is supported in the environment and what the child encounters in their environment. Behavior change, as our last fact, is that it does not happen overnight. Behavior change takes time. Although I will say, if you commit really strongly to this, you can see this changing rapidly. So, oops, I'm so sorry. I don't know what's happened. There it is. Okay, I'm sorry about that. So if you commit to behavior change, you will see a change over the course of, I've seen really heavily learned behaviors change within 2 weeks, reverse a behavior pattern. So it really depends on how much you commit to it. So what is behavior? Behavior is anything a person does, and it is neutral. Behavior is behavior. It is not good or bad. It could be desirable or undesirable, but it is just behavior. So again, we're disconnecting it from the person. We disconnect our own behaviors from our person. That does not mean we're not taking responsibility for our behavior. We absolutely have to, and we have to hold other people accountable for their behavior as well. However, we don't want to personalize it and say that there's something wrong with the person because of the behavior that they engage in. We have to challenge ourselves to think about what we can do to teach a different behavior. What behavior is not states of feeling. So being sad is not a behavior. The reason I'm focusing on this is because you're going to have a homework assignment from this course tonight, which is that I'm going to ask you to send me 3 behaviors that your child does, or a child that you work with, or 3 problematic behaviors that you want to work on. And what I will urge you to do is avoid things like, angry or being sad. That's not really a behavior. It's a state of feeling. But I want you to tell me, what does that look like? What does your child do when he's angry? Because that's what's important. Does he throw chairs across the room? Does he, use profanities? What does it look like? It is not only the bad stuff that people do, as we talked about. It is both good and bad. And that is behavior. So some examples of undesirable behaviors that you might think of as you're thinking of your homework assignment is these might be things that you experience with your child, or with yourself, or with others. Shouting, pushing, hitting, cursing, lying. Those are some examples of undesirable behaviors. Examples of desirable behaviors that we're going to look at focusing on would be like following instructions, accepting no, sharing, or completing chores and homework. So our core principle of behavior is asking the question of why instead of what. The what is really easy. It's just what we observe. It's shouting. That's the what. When we ask the question why, this is the question that most of the time we get wrong. We make assumptions and we are not sure why, so we take our best guess. And this is where often I will say, we're over pathologizing this. We're making guesses. We're thinking that the why is because, he had a long day and then he did this, and it might be because of that. And it's actually way more simple than that. So when we ask this why question in behavior analysis, we ask it from this framework. We understand really there's 2 reasons. And I challenge you to think of any other reasons outside of these 2 columns, any other reasons that people do things. We do things, we engage in behaviors to either get good things or to avoid bad things. Those are really it. Those are the two kind of the core principles of behavior. When I'm in, you know, in the bank in the Cayman Islands, I hold the door open for people because people are going to smile at me and they're going to wait, and I'm going to get that good feeling. That's getting a good thing. I get a good feeling. Whereas if I'm in, New York City, definitely, I don't even, no way I'm going to hold the door for people because it's not socially normal. And the reason it's not socially normal and why it's not maintained by that environment is because people don't acknowledge you. They're too busy. They just walk on by. So nobody does that because it's just not, you don't get anything good out of it. How many of you that live in the Cayman Islands noticed when you moved down here or growing up here that people let you go when you're driving? People pause and they wave. They say, "Oh, come on," they let you in. I am from New Jersey. That would absolutely never happen there, because if I am going to stop my car in the middle of the road to let somebody come in front of me, I'm going to get some bad things. I'm going to get honked at from the people behind me. It's going to be a nightmare. But that doesn't happen in the Cayman Islands. So instead, we get good things. We get that smile and that wave and that acknowledgement from someone, and it feels good. So really think about this. This is why we all do things that we do. You might ask, I think about the alarm clock that's going off in the morning, and why do I hit snooze? Even though I'm going to be late for work, I'm going to feel terrible. Why do I do it? It's because there's that terrible sound and I want to avoid it. I want to avoid that bad thing. And that to me is more powerful than the consequences of being late for work. So think about our kiddos. Children do things because on the one hand, they get good things. They can have access to games or free time. Some children are motivated by getting good grades. Some children are motivated by getting praise from teachers. Some children are just motivated by sensory stimulation. I put the sensory stimulation there because there are behaviors that are not what we call socially mediated. There are behaviors that are just, they feel good. So that's why people do them. We eat because it feels good, or we put on a coat because it's going to stop us from being cold when we're in a cold place. Also, on the same token, children do things to avoid bad things. They will engage in any kind of behavior to avoid getting time out, avoid being scolded, avoid getting spanked, or avoid losing privileges. And sometimes the behavior that they do to avoid that is desirable, and sometimes it's not desirable. So in understanding behavior, we're going to look at what it does for the person. To answer that question of why, we have to understand what does it do for the person. So how is it getting them something good or avoiding something bad? Because that's the only reason behaviors happen. So how is it working for them? We do that by observing what happens before and what happens after. So what is the payoff for them? What is the thing that really the key thing as behavior analysts? I'm always looking at that payoff. We don't go to work every morning for free. If we stopped getting a paycheck, we would stop. So if there's no payoff for a behavior, we don't do it. In these examples below, I also want you to analyze the behavior by what it communicates. So while these behaviors might look very similar, they're actually communicating different things. And we can break it down. I want you to look at this and say to yourself, what is this behavior saying if we had words to it? So in the example I give is the first trigger is time for a bath, and the child runs away. And what is the payoff there? The payoff is that he gets to delay the bath. All right, so maybe he doesn't even take a bath. Maybe parents are like, I'm not fighting this tonight. It's just not worth my time. The next example is the same, where parents say, okay, it's time for a bath, and the child runs away. But this time, it's not just running away. He also makes, a whole fit or show about it. And in that situation, the payoff is different. He does get to delay the bath, but also he gets something else. He gets a lecture. He gets that parent attention. So, sorry. When we when we were looking at this, if I had to replace this middle column with, what is this saying? I'm going to venture to guess in this first example, time for a bath, he runs away, delays the bath. Okay, the payoff is that he didn't have to take the bath right away. So maybe what he was communicating was, I'm not ready to take a bath. If I had to replace it with words, I'd say, I'm not ready. In the second example, it kind of looks to me like the child is saying, I'm not ready, and look at me, look at all the, look at all the fun mess I can make. That's kind of what it sounds like it's saying, what it's communicating. So when you know the why, or the function, as we'll talk about it, you can change the environment. You can, and therefore turn behavior around and change it. How we're going to do that is when we know why it's happening. So when we know what they're communicating in this middle column here, well then great, we're going to teach them how to communicate that in a different way. So we're going to teach the simple communication skills to replace that behavior. If the child is saying, I'm not ready for a bath, great, we've got to teach them the way to say that and to make that work. So we're going to make appropriate responding easier than undesirable behavior. And we're going to deliver what the person needs at times other than after inappropriate behavior. I'll give you an example, a real life example of me as a child. I was the baby child, so I very much loved attention. I also really didn't discriminate between positive and negative attention. It was one and the same for me. And for most children, that is the case. They don't care if you're yelling at them or if you are giving them positive attention. For a lot of kids, particularly the youngest in a family of 3 children who I had to compete for attention with, absolutely don't care. Attention is attention, and I wanted it on me. So I remember my mom loves to remind me of this story. When I was a child, my mother was on the phone, and I went up. I used all my appropriate responses. I said, Mom, I need you to get off the phone, Mom. And she goes, oh, just wait a sec, hon. Just wait. And okay, I waited. I went back 2 minutes, 1 minute later. Mom, I need you. Right, tapping on her shoulder. She said, honey, wait. And so she's really not listening. And I can tell she's cross with me at this point. So resourceful as I am, I go to the refrigerator. I get a carton of eggs 12 eggs in their carton. And I went back over to my mom. This is when we had a landline, so she's not going anywhere. She's not pacing around. I just go right up to her, stand in front of her, make eye contact, and then I take the eggs and I throw them on the ground. And what does my mother do? Of course she goes, I'll call you back. And she hangs up the phone with her friend. I'm like, yes, I got it. Right? So my communication skills, I had the skills. I knew exactly how I was supposed to ask for my mom's attention, but it didn't work. It was not effective. So I give that example because we've got to think a lot of times we don't even have to teach the skill. The child has the skill, but it's not effective because we're not making it be effective. Because what is more effective? It's often not, it's just not going to get your attention when, and we ignore a lot of the times the behaviors that we're supposed to be paying attention to. All it would have taken for my mom, most likely, I won't speak for the, terrible child that I was, but I will say, I would recommend my mom could have put down the phone for 5 seconds, said, hey, Betsy or whatever, I need just a second. Can you wait just a second? Just put the phone down for a second. Hey, Anush, what is it that you need? Oh, I just wanted to show you my cool thing. Yeah, Anush, I'm on the phone. I just need 5 minutes and then I will attend to you, okay? Great. I bet you my bucket would have been filled and I would have walked away. So we want to make that appropriate responding easier than going to the fridge and getting a carton of eggs. And we want to deliver what they need at times other than after the inappropriate behavior. So the worst thing that my mother did was hang up the phone. She responded immediately to the problem behavior by giving me exactly what I wanted, which was her attention. and I got bad, negative attention, but my oh my, did I love that. That was great. The facial reactions, all of that stuff, kids thrive on it. They love to see their parents upset. It's, I mean, not all kids, but yeah. So we'll talk about functions more at the next session. As I said, I will give you some homework. You don't have to do this, but it will lay our foundation for next session, because what we're going to do next session is we're going to talk about behaviors that you're experiencing at home with your children, and we're going to dissect them. We're going to chart the ABCs, just like we did with Johnny in the bath. And we're going to start trying to answer that why question and determining what is the function. Why are these kids doing this? So if you have 3 undesirable behaviors that you want to work on, you can send me an email. It is on the screen there. I will respond as soon as possible, probably this weekend. But what I will also do is I will make a list of these. I won't put your names involved. I won't say whose behaviors are whose, but I will bring them up on the screen for our next session, and we will dissect them together. So I will leave it with that. I will also open up the forum if anybody has any questions that they kind of have about what we covered today. Please feel free to unmute yourself and ask. Otherwise, I won't be offended if you sign off, and I will see you next week, Thursday at this same time. I hope you found this valuable as a first go. So I will open the forum now for anyone who has any questions.